Thanks for coming here today. My name is Jen. I'm a designer over at Google. I lead the Content ID UX team at YouTube, which is basically how people who make YouTube videos manage their copyright on the platform. And here today, I'm here to talk to you. My talk is called UX for Non-UXers, but really what it means is I want to break down what UX is for engineers into kind of its core essentials, where I believe that it is a process and a bunch of questions that you ask during that process and a bunch of tools that will lead you to the answers of those questions. So I hope that we could kind of unpack this UX thing together, which I think everyone knows, but means user experience. And in this room, I know that there are a couple types of people. You might have UX teams that you work with. You might be completely unsupported and have to own the UX process yourself. And I really hope that this talk speaks to both of those types of people. Only one talk, but if you have UX support, I want you to understand why we're doing what we're doing and encourage you to get involved and know where the points are that you could do that. If you don't have a UX team, what I want you to do is understand the tools and methodologies and maybe be able to apply some of them yourselves that kind of would help you end up with a better product overall. So I guess to kind of kick this talk off, what I want to do is start with a story. So like I mentioned before, I own copyright tools on YouTube, and we know that the existing copyright experience is really kind of crazy. When I talk about creators, that's our fancy word internally for people who make YouTube videos, and I make tools that they use. So when creators hear about copyright, this is usually their reaction. They don't love it. They think it's really complicated and complex. So when the opportunity to redesign our new system came up, our team was really excited, and they heard user feedback about how painful this was and how confusing copyright is on the system. So they wanted to use this redesign as an opportunity to kind of increase and optimize the user experience. So one day during this process, I got an email from one of my teammates, a non-UXer, of course, and it said, "Hey Jen, have you decided on the color of the copyright icon? I'm thinking red because it will alert creators to any potential problems and stand out while they're scanning the page." So I got this email and kind of right away I was like, oh, okay, that's exciting, but I wasn't super thrilled. And I shared this story with a bunch of my friends, and this was their reaction. They were like, Jen, what gives? Like, you should be really proud of your team. They're considering user needs. They're considering pain points. They're talking about how to make something more visible and optimize it. This is kind of what you preach as a UX designer. Why are you not high-fiving them back? And I guess it's kind of simple, but it also hits on kind of a pet peeve of mine that really UX is not about something sorry, it's a big point, so I'm going to say it again. UX is not about how something looks. It's when we're talking about what color an icon should be, we're zeroing in already on the aesthetics. We're not talking about, do we need an icon? Or even bigger questions, what information do we need to communicate? How should we communicate it? What's the process that creators or users are going through to be able to communicate this information? And that's really what the core foundation of UX. It's really about how something works, not how something looks. So by going through this definition, I want to, I guess, set a baseline of what good UX is. So my definition of what it is, ooh, that should not happen, is good UX, pretend the yellow is not there, achieves user goals, works efficiently, and solves business needs. Oh man, it really looked fine 5 minutes ago. So in these, you might start thinking to yourself, we have these user goals, that sounds like UX, but then works efficiently. That might sound like engineering. And solving business needs, that might sound more like product management. So I guess my goal or my point here is that good UX combines the roles of everyone involved in a product team. It's not my job as a user experience designer to put out a good product that's usable. It's your job, and it's everybody who's part of a product team. Without any of these, we won't be able to propose and put forward a good product. And I guess this kind of leads me to a disclaimer. I like to think of design on a spectrum, starting from literacy to mastery. I think everyone in this room kind of has a basic design literacy, meaning that you understand the essential, principles and words that we throw around in UX. What I want to do is move everyone from literacy to fluency. And that means that you could put UX principles into practice, so you know what process to follow, what methods that you could use, what questions you should be asking, and how to evaluate whether something is good UX. So the best framework that I try to explain this to you is to uncover the UX process. But when I was kind of going through trying to find our Google or YouTube internal the process, it kind of didn't exist. I wound up with literally 50 different diagrams. So what I'm going to do is try to construct one for you that I think best explains what we're doing and why we're doing it. So this is the format that I want to take. It's kind of based on something that Google Drive put together. And it's a 6-step process that goes from something that's very defined, branches out, and then comes back to something that's more defined. So what this means is we're starting really small, we're getting big by creating lots and lots of ideas, and then we're slowly refining them into something that's tangible that we could build and put out. And as you'll notice, there's kind of this section over here and this section all the way on the other side, which means that this is something that's iterative and cyclical. So it's something that we do over and over and over again throughout the life cycle of a product. So like I said, I'm going to kind of go through each of the 6 phases in here. At the end of the day, I really think that UX could be boiled down to a method that's questions that you're asking and tools to kind of solve or answer those questions. So what I want to do is show you both in hopes that you understand what you could do and when you could use it. So when you're working on your product, when you go back to your office and your everyday job away from this conference, you could think of these things and suggest, hey, maybe we could do X or Y, and I'll show you them all in a minute. So the first phase that we want to go through is the understand phase. And our goal right here is to build an understanding of your audience and your space. So you really want to know who's using your product, what are their needs, what are their goals, their desires, their motivations, and then what already exists to satisfy that need. How can you uniquely position your tool, your service, your product, your team to answer these needs that users have? So a couple of ways that we could do that. This comes as no shock, I assume, that you should observe and talk to users. So my key takeaway for when you're doing this is to create a discussion guide, and in that you want to outline what your goals are and kind of talking points that you want to have a conversation with people who are using your products. Here the key is kind of providing a framework and listening instead of guiding people to an answer that you want them to give. There are other ways that you could collect user feedback that as engineers you are all uniquely positioned to do. There's ways that you could incorporate it into your tool. So we have kind of a whole bunch of buttons that say give feedback. Creators can take a screenshot, annotate it, and write a couple of sentences about what they're feeling and send it in to us. And once we get this, what we want to do is look for patterns, and that's the key when we're going through user feedback. It's great that one person gives us feedback, and that's completely valid and should not be dismissed, but when 2 people, then 10 people, and 100 people are saying the same thing, that kind of points to either a need that's not met, a problem that they're having, or some way to understand what is happening in the minds of these people that are going to be using our products. If you don't have something like this, there's kind of cheaper ways that we're getting into a little biased realm here. So if you have an app or any place that you sell your product, you might have user feedback there. Generally, these tend to be really polarized, very positive or very negative. But again, if you're looking for patterns, someone saying, oh, I can't accomplish feature X, or you're missing feature Y, those are things that are uncovering a need that your users are expressing. Again, there's a lot of things that in UX, we try to figure out the what and the why, and that's, again, this understanding phase. So qualitative feedback, when you're talking to users, when you're observing them, when you are reading things that they've written out, we call that qualitative feedback, and that really tells you the why. But quantitative feedback, these kind of analytics and numbers, can tell you the what. So there's a bunch of things that you could set up either in an existing product or before you launch a product to help measure what is important to your user. So you could use things like data analytics or historic and secondary research. So what has been written about your types of users, about your types of products, and then also something called HATS. So this is a internal, but it's been published, so I could share it, methodology of how to determine user satisfaction. And it's basically just a 10-point Likert scale. How satisfied are you? Extremely dissatisfied to extremely satisfied, which will give you a quantitative, which will tell you the what. And then it has optional free-form text. So you could fill in a few sentences and get the why. So I know I'm flying through all of these really quickly. It's just meant to give you an introduction and to say if any of these are meaningful to you, jot them down, take them home, and kind of delve more into them and be able to apply them to your work in the future. So this was a quick whirlwind of the understand phase. So just to recap, in order to build an understanding of your audience and space, you want to observe users, you want to seek out feedback, learn from kind of these free data metrics about the what, and uncover historical research. So moving into the second phase, which is define, you want to establish the purpose of your project. So the questions that you're looking for here are, what's the problem? How can we help? And why are we doing this? What would a successful launch look like? So in this, the first thing that you want to do is define your problem. And again, team sport. It's not just the designers, it's not just the engineers, it's not just the product managers doing this. You want to really define the problem. So this was our problem for the copyright example that I shared with you before. It's not too important to get into the details, but what I do want to focus on is this sentence that's, how might we? And how might we is how we like to phrase questions because there's kind of a science. The yellow is fine on this one. So the how means that there's an answer. The might means that we're not sure and we're giving us the freedom and flexibility to try and fail of whether something might or might not work. And the we means that we're going to do it as a team. So when we define these problems in our way, we're giving each other the wiggle room and freedom to create ideas, to try them, and to move forward with what kind of works and is validated, which is essentially what this UX process is trying to do. The next thing that we try to do is define who our users are. You could do it in a way that's kind of words, or something that you might be more, I guess, accustomed to seeing are types of personas or demographics where we're taking categories and ranking what users do across a series or a spectrum of different details. So this is really important because you want to understand and get in the mind of who you are creating this product for and what they're going to think is useful or helpful or successful or necessary. The next thing, and I guess this is, if you only take one thing away from this presentation, this is what I want to be. It is the importance of user flows and user journeys. So what I really like to do is before we kind of really get into the nitty-gritty of products is to map out every single step a user is going to take, every single decision that they're going to make. And what that ensures is that I have this complete end-to-end perspective of what's happening. Where are the points for failure? Where are the opportunity points to make something delightful or happy or, just efficient? And it could take several different kind of views. So this would be more of like a process flow. Or it could be something that's more of a sentence structure. So we call these critical user journeys. That's what CUJ means. And these are the things that you're really optimizing your product for. So if you've heard of the 80-20 rule, 80% of users only use 20% of your product. These are those 20%. They're the really, really important things that people are doing either every day. So it's like a routine, like brushing their teeth. We call those toothbrush journeys. Or it's things that they're doing once in a while, but they're really important. If they get wrong, they end up in disaster. So outlining them either in a flow or in language, and then breaking them down into features. So again, this is just another visual representation of how you could map out a journey. So there's no correct way to do it. The important thing is break it down into steps. So here we have different phases, and on the top is what users are needing to do, and then what features they're touching. So I really like to do this because at Google, the way that designers track and the way that engineers track their work are really different. And if we don't map our journeys and features, we're kind of talking two different languages, and that's not okay. Also, what it ensures is that when we're building this, and we'll get to it later, that everything is complete and represented in the tool, so we don't leave any users stranded. Kind of the end of the define phase would be to map out your success metrics. And this means what does success mean for your tool? What will you be happy at the end of kind of this product or project that you're working on? And how will you be able to communicate that? So for success metrics, what we try to do if you have an existing product, benchmark it, what's happening right now, and then create something aspirational. And when you create these aspirational metrics, we want them to be concrete. So we want numbers in there, and we also want, if you remember my qualitative thing before, a combination of the what's and the whys. So numbers are great, they tell us a lot of things, but they don't always tell us why. So it's great to have kind of numbers, and then so like weekly active users, and then also the why, so you could have a satisfaction number, people are whatever satisfied, and then here's why. So we're flying through this, I know. We'll stop for questions at the end. To establish the purpose of your project, uncover the problem, list the considerations, agree on scope with journeys, map them to features, please, and then define success. So the third, phase is what most people who are not in the UX field, I think, usually associate with the UX field. It's the part where you get all the pretty visuals, and really what it is a way for us to create and share a broad range of ideas. So in this, what we're doing is we are learning from inspiration. We're thinking about this how might we that we mentioned before, and also thinking about what the key things I need to communicate are. And this is kind of the most important part of this process, that when I talk about generating methodologies, we only have two goals at this point. It's to communicate and it's to learn. So when I'm brainstorming, I'm learning about potential solutions to a problem. There's no right or wrong way to do it, but what you want to do is start at the lowest fidelity possible. So what that means is if you could answer the question on a whiteboard, answer it on a whiteboard, or sketching with pen and paper. If it needs to be a bit more refined, you should do that. And we have tools for that as well. So something called Wireframes, you've probably seen it. They're trying to solve, they're trying to solve questions about where information should be located, how to progress from one part of a tool to another. So as you see, we're going from something that's broad to a bit more defined. And we could get even more defined into things like mocks, where we're fleshing out visual details, and prototypes, where we're fleshing out different interactions. And I think the key takeaway in this part is you really want to be as cheap as possible. I know it sounds silly, but if we were to prototype every single interaction we had in a tool, we'd waste a lot of time, and we wouldn't gain a lot of value from it. So if you could answer the question by scribbling on a napkin and throwing it away, that's fine. But for example, I have stakeholders that are across the world, and sometimes a standalone sketch isn't enough. Sometimes we need to do more detailed mocks or prototypes. And that's kind of your decision, and these are tools in your toolbox, and you have to decide what to use and when to use it, but start low and then end high. Another thing that we have at Google is kind of a sprint methodology. You might have heard of it. I'm not going to spend too much time. It could be a talk in itself, but really what it is a compressed methodology for designing, testing really quickly. So in a period of 4 or 5 days, you're coming up with an idea, you're building it and prototyping it, you're testing it with users, and then seeing what you learn from the experience. So if you want to learn more about it, catch me after the talk or Google it. So to summarize the generate phase, we're creating and sharing a broad range of ideas, again, just to communicate or learn, nothing more. None of this ends up in the product, but it serves as inspiration, communication, or details that will get you from kind of the UX thinking into a finished product that users could have in their hands. So the next phase would be to evaluate, and this is where we want to check alignment. So how are we doing against our kind of user definition, their needs, and the success metrics that we set up before, and then also improve the proposed solution. So in this phase, we're asking what's meaningful and relevant, and then how does the proposed solution align with what we've defined in that define and understand phase. And a couple of ways that we could do that is by gaining internal feedback. Internal feedback is really cheap. It allows you to work really quickly. So this is just a screenshot of a tool that we have. It is also available externally if you want to use it. We post our designs, and then everyone on the team could comment and give either examples, express concerns, provide inspiration or ideas for you to try. And what it is a nice way to collaborate and kind of get out the high-level bugs or issues before we move into something that we're going to put in front of users. Which kind of brings us to the next one. I know that this is white because it's a lot of text that I don't want you to read. So it's really just the framework that I want you to see. So again, we spoke about talking to users in the beginning. We want to talk to them again. We want to understand, based on the concepts that we've provided, the sketches, the wireframes, the mocks, the prototypes, what is working and what's not working. So I guess the key to this is, again, looking for patterns. We call it summative testing, and what we want to do is propose high level what's happening out of all of the users we spoke to. So one of my friends created this method. She calls it the roses, buds, and thorns methods. Roses are things that are in your concepts or those proposed solutions that are working really well. It's things that you want to keep and move forward with. Buds are kind of unrealized opportunities. There's something there, but you're not capitalizing on it. So what can you take and grow into something that's going to flourish? And thorns are things that are kind of hairy pain points we don't really want to have. They're problems that we need to continue to solve and optimize on before we get this thing out the door. Another thing that everyone could talk to users internally. You might not be able to talk to users externally, but you can use product and release life cycles to help answer questions. And again, you have to be mindful and make the decision about which is the best way to get these answers and to test your concepts. But what we did was you could do things like A/B testing. So having 2 versions of your product, put it out there and measure the difference in one of your success metrics. We do phased rollouts a lot, so we try to launch our riskiest material first and try to get feedback to make sure that it's working. So in this example, what we did was, before building a product that we didn't know if users would really love, we started it as an email. Like, it sounds really simple, and when the idea came up, we were like, oh, that's like a lot less exciting than building an actual product. But it was something that we needed to do to validate the need and answer those kind of bigger concept questions that we developed in the previous generate phase. The next thing you could do is tiered rollouts, and that's, we very rarely launch 100% from one day to another. Launch to 5%, 10%, see what's happening, get a pulse check on your users, maybe try to talk to them, talk to proxies from them, and see what's working. And then you could continue to roll out to a larger group of people as your product is working as you intended it to. So you check alignment, feedback, internal, external, and experiment. We're getting to the end. The 5th part, or the 5th phase, would be to refine. And this is when we're refocusing the effort and filling in the details. So in this, we're really just asking a couple of questions. What's essential? Remember the 80-20 rule. We don't want to bloat our product with unnecessary features. And we also want to talk about what it takes to take my idea into something that's really real. Because like I said, it's great that I've created a ton of mocks or a ton of prototypes, but they're not going to do anything if they're not out there in the world. So in order to do that, again, the reason I love journeys so much is because it lets you know where you're missing things. So I call this stage fill in the gaps, but it's really saying you have all these concepts and these ideas that you've created, and you're working on, and you've evaluated them. You know that they're going to work, but you haven't tested every single thing. So you need to figure out what you have done and what you haven't done. And journeys let us do that. So depending on how your team is tracking, what you could do is just pull out the map again and say, okay, everything that's there we've done, but we haven't done everything that's outlined in blue. And again, this is a way to make sure that when you put a user in this tool, in this situation, they're not left stranded. They could do everything that they came in to do from start to finish. Again, just to make sure that they have end-to-end flows, I guess I want to say sometimes this is, I guess, a reiteration of the earlier point where you want to be as cheap as possible. So we do want end-to-end flows, but we don't have to have a mock for every single one. It might be useful, and if that's what your team needs in order to communicate what the solution is, you should do it. But if your team is better off with creating one template and being able to apply it to a variety of situations to finish that journey, that's also good. You should do that. It's really about uncovering what needs to happen and how your team works in order to make sure that this end-to-end flow is incorporated into your product. The next thing is, again, we're building in kind of fidelity, is specs. I know they're kind of old school. We don't have to do them for everywhere, but again, what your team needs. What do you need to communicate to get from this one piece of kind of scribble on a paper or some sort of visual on a paper into a product that's real? So this is just communicating what the padding, the spacing, the alignment, the text styles are. Sometimes you could bypass that in terms of using things like pattern libraries. So you might have heard of the material design language or frameworks like Atomic Design. What it allows us to do is shortcut the communication between UX and engineering. And if you could set this up and it's a design language that you're consistently working in, I would strongly urge you to consider it. So what it allows me to do, instead of saying, please put a button that has a corner radius of 2 and font size of 14 and hex color of 00770CC or something like that, I think I gave you too many numbers, it just says use button. So it kind of shortcuts that process of refining and filling in the details that you were missing before. And then I guess the last two are internationalization and accessibility. And this is just making sure that throughout the process, you're considering people who are not like you. Simple example for internationalization is date formats, right? We have a lot of dates in our product. When you are talking about kind of the yellow countries, I stole this from Wikipedia, the yellow countries are like a year, month, date format, and the others are different ones. So make sure that your product is flexible enough to handle things like different formatting. Also consider things like sentence structuring, how if you're creating a sentence, the noun could be in the beginning or the end for some different languages. And my favorite is leaving room for translations. Things get really, really long in Polish and German too, that we don't always account for in English. So that's something that you want to be wary and cognizant of, that like you are most likely not going to be the end user of your product. The last thing is accessibility, and that is making sure that you consider people who have varying degrees of ability, whether they are impairments of visibility or hearing impairment, or a situational disability. What if there's someone who's using your app that is carrying groceries, so they only have one hand available? Make sure that you consider, in terms of their usage, how they would have a successful experience, to the best of your ability. And this is what we refer to as green lines, the screenshot. It's just a way to communicate keyboard tabbing behavior to make sure that you could access the right information at the right time. So quickly, to refocus effort, we want to keep only what's needed. Again, 80-20, cut out what you don't need, please, please, please. Plug the gaps, use your journeys to identify what's not there that should be, iron out all of those edge cases, those error states, and then design for inclusivity. Make sure you include and consider people who are not like yourself. The last phase that we have is build and measure. You guys are all engineers, you know a lot more about building than I do, so I'm just going to focus on the measure part. And in this, we really want to ensure that the end product is exactly what you intended, and making it better. So answering questions like, are we done? Were we successful? What did we learn? What's next? So I know this is kind of a scary list, but what I really urge everyone to do is create a UX QA method. And what it is just go through the product and follow your user journeys that you've outlined before. And note down everything that's wrong with a screenshot. And things could be really big, like I can't get from step 1 to step 2. But they could also be really small, like this margin should be 16 pixels, but it's currently 8. And why we want to do this is to create a prioritization, to get everyone on board with what product quality and product excellence, we refer to it internally, is. So once we create this list, we want to work with our team to create a prioritization mechanism to say, this is launch blocking, because I strongly believe everyone here has the ability to block launch. What should happen before we launch again? And then what are the time frames for something else? So we use P0 as launch blocking, P1 blocks the next launch, P2 you have to fix before the end of the quarter or launch is blocked, and then P3 would be a new feature request. Then we bring back our success metrics from before. Once we build this, we could start measuring against the benchmarks that we've set up before and evaluating. So to ensure the product is better and works as intended, agree on what's good enough, launch it, measure success, and then commit to making it better. Create that fix list, determine what should happen before launch, and then put it into practice either before or after you launch. So this was, I know, a whirlwind tour of all the different UX processes and methods that you could apply. Want to stress that it is iterative, so you have this diamond that constantly repeats, so you don't have to solve every single part of every single question at one time. Slice it up, focus on one, go through the 6 phases, and then focus on the next one after. Okay, so that was the process, and then I guess I wanted to end with 5 reasons that I've seen in my experience working with a variety of engineering teams at Google and outside of Google that kind of prohibits engineers from taking part in the UX process. So these are my not so scientific quotes, but I promise that I did see all of them. The first one is, but Jen, engineers don't speak to users. My answer is always, why not? You should. Every time that I run a session or my user researchers run a session, we invite our engineers. And they come and they learn about what's working, what's not working, what's important, what's not, and then they could come up with ideas and feed back into the product. Your job shouldn't just be taking what I say and building it. I think that's boring, right? You want to contribute to all of this yourself. Again, there's a bunch of other ways that you as engineers are uniquely positioned to answer or get more insights from users through data analytics, through logs, any type of querying you could do to find out those qualitative metrics is super helpful at this point. The next one, so 2 out of 5, is we can't build an entire journey. We work in features. Again, map them, take a journey, map it down into features, but agree on launching journeys. It's like my number one thing is if you launch end-to-end journeys, that means a user will never get stuck. They could always complete what they're trying to do, and really that's one of the number one reasons that users kind of get frustrated at products. They don't understand what's happening. The third one is that UX unrealistically expects perfection. Okay, maybe we do, but I think what we're really getting to is we really want to uphold product quality, and we want that to be everyone's job, and we don't want to do that in a mean way. So, like I said before, that whole prioritization method is something that works for me and my team, and you should define one that works for your team. So when we find something that doesn't adhere to our quality, is it so bad that we have to launch without it, or is it something that we could continue to move forward with? And I guess the last 2 are, we don't have time to think about UX. I'd argue that you already do. As we've said before, I think that UX is kind of a team sport, and there's really not one person who owns what this is and what it's not. And the last one is, I'm not creative and I don't draw. That's okay. Very rarely do I either. So really, again, UX is all about communication and learning, and you only need to do what is, in your realm of, ability and comfort. So if you can't draw, that's fine. It's usually just rectangles and words anyway. But you could also make use of a whole bunch of frameworks out there, either from, anything that you see online. There's a whole bunch of toolkits or existing languages and components within your existing system. So those are kind of, again, super high level, but the 5 reasons that I really think that UX and engineers kind of have difficulty in working together. And I hope that by understanding a bit about the process and what we do, why we do, you could kind of unpack where you could get involved a little more. So just to leave you on kind of a recap of what we spoke today in this whirlwind session, 5 big ideas is UX is a process. Mocks are really less than 10% of what we do, I promise. I really just want you guys to learn about the questions we're trying to answer and ask them yourselves with the tools that are proposed. If you don't do it, it won't happen. There's literally, I'm one designer, I have 2 others, a researcher, to like 10 PMs and 80 engineers. Like there's no way that UX by themselves is going to be able to accomplish this. So it's everyone's responsibility. And yeah, hopefully you have the tools to get started. And even though it was just a broad overview, if there's anything that you learned about or saw that you want to learn more about it, check it out online. Feel free to get in touch with me. And yeah, that's it. Cool, so I think we have a few minutes? Yeah, a few minutes for questions. Does anyone have any? Yeah?
Okay, will be tough. You said about the whole UX process, about the redesigning of certain application and so on. But the question is how to convince the product manager or product owner to invest the time for like A/B tests or something like this, because you know that you have in your product a bunch of features, and anything what they want is throwing to the user with another features, yeah. And you know that from user experience point of view, the application or the product is a crap.
So I would be lying if I said we didn't see that. We're not immune to it at Google, but I think really what it is an education about what UX is and why it's so, I guess, productive for a product. So what I generally like to do is share information about the return on investment in UX. Yes, it will cost more time, budget, resources in the beginning, but what it will do is save you from making mistakes later in the end that are going to cost you more to come back and fix. We generally like to share case studies about why, different case studies outlining different success metrics that have happened from our team and parallel teams within the organization. And then sometimes we even take leadership and put them in user testing sessions where users are kind of struggling to do things that the leadership thinks is normal and works well. And then they kind of get that aha moment to say like, hey, okay, maybe this doesn't work as well as I did, and I'm not gonna lie, I don't think you'll get investment upright to say like, yes, let's go through the entire UX process, but maybe you could start by saying, can I have 2 extra days, right? I just want to run this by users. Or pick and choose, depending on the questions that you want to ask, what methodology it is, and start asking at that kind of bottom micro level, and then build up, right? A culture doesn't build overnight. It's just something that we could start bit by bit incorporating, and hopefully from there, something larger could develop. Does that answer your question? Anyone else?
Great presentation, by the way. I just have a quick question. How much time usually takes from start to launch the journey?
Yeah.
And are they going in parallel, or it's just one at a time?
So the question was, how long does it take, and can you work in parallel? So I'm going to give you a bad answer. The question is, like, the timeline is determined by project needs, and there are things that we could do to kind of increase or decrease the velocity depending on how much time we need to launch in. So it could take anything from a couple of weeks to, multiple months. But we can run things in parallel, and we often do, because sometimes you need to pause if you can't reach out to users at the right time. So what we like to do is kind of prioritize. So we take those critical user journeys and we number. 1 is our most important, 2, 3, 4, and we'll start with 1 and then kind of have like a overlapping chart to make sure that we're never stalled or blocked, but we're focusing on the first one as our utmost priority. Cool. Anyone else? Okay, well thanks guys. I'll be around afterwards, so if you have any questions, feel free to pop outside and ask me there.